The fact this game just quietly loads into its title screen will never not feel weird to me in a way I cannot quite put into words. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Goof Troop for the Super Nintendo. After we accidentally load the demo, let's get into the game story. It was a great day for fishing in Spoonerville, so Goofy and his pals headed out to the ocean with their boats. Cruising for the big ones in the open water, Pete and PJ were suddenly caught in the ominous shadow of a gigantic ship. When Goofy and Max looked up, they saw a huge pirate ship heading out to Spoonerville Island. Pete and PJ were on board, victims of a pirate kidnapping. Goofy rode for all he was worth, but he couldn't catch up to the pirate ship before it landed on the island. Determined to rescue their friends, Goofy and Max set out to explore the island and find the pirate stronghold. And now you get to choose your character. You can either play as Goofy or Max in one player, or you can bring a buddy along to play as both in two-player. And honestly, if you're playing the game yourself, I actually recommend playing it in two-player because I think the game's a little more interesting and memorable like that. Not that the game's bad for single-player, but I think two-player gets the most out of this game. Still looking now, man. Keelhaul Pete, the dreaded Pirate King, has returned. Located throughout the game's 5 stages, there are NPCs you can talk to, usually for just very minor plot beats, and the occasional hint for the stage themselves. They're more just set dressing than anything. And, well, with how their speech is typed out, you can tell this was a mid-90s game. You know, Spoonerville Island used to be a safe place before Keelhaul Pete got out of that whale. So a moment ago, I grabbed our first tool, a hookshot. Goof Troop is not a very complicated game to play, barring the start button and D-pad. You only actually use 2 buttons, the Y and the B button. The B button causes Goofy and Max to raise and lower their hands. If you're next to an item when you do that, you pick it up and you can throw it. This is actually where the main gameplay difference between Goofy and Max is. When Goofy throws items, they do more damage than as Max, but Max moves faster, if memory serves. And the Y button just uses whatever tool you have equipped. In this case, we got the hookshot, which does your usual Zelda-type hookshot things. It brings items to you. It can also technically bring you to things, but you can only do that wherever you see hooks on the floor. Notably, when you're playing co-op, every player can only hold 1 item, but in single player, you can hold up to 2 items. So in this case, I can hold the hookshot and the bell. The bell, by the way, is sort of a bait item. When you ring it, enemies on screen will all start gunning for you directly, even if there's something in their way. So you can use that to bait them in certain directions and then either hit them with things you pick up or by kicking the blocks with the B button, which is both the main puzzle element for the game as well as, honestly, probably one of the most consistent weapon types. Some stages do have minor enemies that aren't pirate types, like the bees or the snakes you're seeing. They're a little unique enemy-wise in that they can actively be taken out by your hookshot or even some other sub-weapons directly. Not that there's many opportunities where you're going to get to do that, but they're all the same. Also, if I look like I'm a little lost in stage 1, it's because I am, because I only practiced this stage once versus I practiced the other stages a couple of times. So the main big deal with Goof Troop is that it is a puzzle game where you're roaming levels, and the main thing we're going to be doing is either finding items like this board here to fill out gaps in level design to get to new areas, or kicking blocks over little star panels to make certain gates open up, do other things in the levels, or otherwise. Honestly, you see a lot of what the game has to offer in terms of just mechanics in this stage. It just gets more complicated as you go. The most unique thing in every stage is, barring like maybe 1 or 2 rooms, probably the boss fights. You're gonna need a bridge to get through here, and you got one. By and large, the game does a good job of actively putting items in a room if you need to fight enemies, but you can walk past most enemies in any given room. Unless there's literally a gate blockading you from progressing onwards, you usually can just ignore enemies. And also, the gates in this game make me laugh because, we saw at the start of the game, this is a Capcom game. I'll talk more about the staff involved directly next time, probably. but this game's sound font, I think is, I want to say, mostly the same as the original Mega Man X's. To the point where whenever you open a gate, it's the same sound effect as X getting hit. I actively went back a moment ago to grab this hookshot because I wanted to grab the items that are on screen right now. We might as well talk about items right now. There's a couple of items you can just pick up throughout the game. Bananas, cherries, and 2 variants of diamonds. Cherries add 1 heart to the top left of the screen. Bananas add 2 hearts. Those hearts are essentially your health meter. Because if you have nothing up there next to your HUD, you are a one-hit wonder. If you take 1 shot, you're down. But if you grab fruit, you get a little bit of a barrier. You can take an extra hit or 2. It does usually take most of your health, especially later on in the game. But there's not enough enemies to the point where it becomes threatening. There is a key. It does what you think. You need those to open up certain gates. In more or less the structure of every level is grabbing items to go find rooms with keys in them and then take those keys to the doors. In some regards, you can look at every level as a very, I'm not gonna say very small Zelda dungeon, but a smaller than usual Zelda dungeon for your movement speed. So within the 2 stages, there are another item type that can actively help you. That is the diamonds. There's 2 variants of them, like with the fruits. There's the red diamonds, which are outright extra lives, which the number of that is always seen at the top left, and I think technically caps out visually, but it might be one of those games where even if it caps up at like 6 or 9, it technically goes above that. And the bluish pink ones, which are continues. You can use the shovel over there. Maybe you'll find hidden pirate treasure. The shovel is the worst usable item in the game because it only shows up in like 2 or 3 of them anyway, and whenever you can, it's very finicky when you use it. For one thing, drops from the panels you dig on are set. For instance, I know there's always an extra life here in the very top right of this group here, which is why I always dig around here. But the other rewards are usually just going to be fruit that aren't going to be worth it anyway, because usually you have enough in the stages themselves without having to dig. And also, digging itself is weirdly... sticky is not the right word, but it's what comes to mind. In that, you need to be perfectly aligned with a tile on your left or right to dig with it. You can't dig on a panel if you're above it, below it, or if you're not perfectly aligned with it. It just doesn't feel great to dig, period, in the game, and that's part of the reason why I don't do it anyway. And here I'm going to be using the other purpose of the hookshot. Like I said, really good for taking out the smaller enemies, and I don't do it for a little bit, from memory at least. But you can also actively use the hookshot as a stunning tool against the normal enemy types in the game, just the pirates. In fact, if you're playing 2-player, I actually recommend using that in case you're in some more tight corridors, because it gives you a way to let a friend pass through enemies. Because when an enemy's stunned, you can just walk through them. It's just that usually in 1-player, they're not stunned long enough for you to be able to take advantage of that. Stage 1 on the whole isn't too much to worry about. None of the enemies are really much of a threat, and the puzzles themselves are pretty easy. With that said, I guess at the end of the day, this is a game made for babies, almost probably literally. So them going a little bit on the easier side makes sense. It also depends on whether or not you're really good at these types of spatial awareness puzzles where you can see where an item might go when you start kicking in a certain direction and all that. That there is the second variety of key. That is the master key. You need that to unlock usually just a bigger door right before the boss fight in most stages. The keys themselves are probably why they actively give a single player the ability to hold 2 items instead of the 2 players being able to hold 1. Because if you couldn't pick up the item and then defend yourself with, say, the hook shot, or using things like the bell to bait enemies away, or otherwise, you'd be kind of in a rough state, because if they don't give you items to pick up and throw, oh boy, the game would be probably impossible. And here's us using the bell just to bait those guys over there and kick into them. Once we open up that big door at the top, though, it's time for the first boss, which is, honestly, in my eyes, probably the second hardest boss in the game. We will smash you! We will crush! We will bash you into mush! This is Jester Hole. It's just a bunch of pirates in holes that you have to play whack-a-mole with. There is technically enough pirates for each hole, but when you take a pirate out of a hole, that doesn't mean that hole is empty. The others can still pop in and out of them. You have a couple of barrels around you can throw at them to start, but eventually you do have to actively catch the things they throw at you to throw into them. The easiest thing to do that with is barrels, because if you just put your hands up in the air and get towards where a barrel that they're throwing is going to land, you can just pick it straight up. Same with the bombs. It's just safer to do it with the barrels, because the bombs do have a timer until they explode. If you're holding it while it explodes, well, you're probably losing a life. And I don't think you can catch the little red, spiky things they throw whatsoever. At the end of a stage, your time is tallied up, and you get a password. Passwords in this game are pretty self-explanatory. It's just the usual image-based password that you saw in things like Castlevania 4 and all that jazz. Well, now wait just a second. You bullies? Where'd you take our pals?
Pals? We didn't take anyone anywhere, matey. We thought our pirate leader had been swallowed by a whale, but we just rescued him. When he finds out what you've done to us, he'll become looking for you for certain. Whoa, I'm shaking in my high tops, dude.
And now we're on to stage 2, where we largely do a lot of the same, just a little more complicated. This game is definitely a fun playthrough, I will say, but it is pretty samey by the end of it as well. Holy smoke, look what they've done to my farm! Oh, I wish Keelhaul Pete had stayed in that whale. Like, they introduced some new things in every stage, don't get me wrong. But because you only have 2 abilities by default before using items like the hook shot, there is only so much they probably could have done. Be careful of these statues that fire at you, by the way, because sometimes they're not actively tracking onto you, it feels like, but sometimes it feels like they just are timed in such a way that's very easy to take hits. So, my experience with Goof Troop is probably pretty much the same as a lot of other people, at least when it comes to the show. I watched reruns of it growing up, namely on, like, Toon Disney, because I was born late enough in, like, the Disney afternoon stuff that I wasn't really around for a lot of the fresh airings. And I liked it a lot. Extremely Goofy Movie was one of my favorite movies growing up, and the original Goofy Movie, I think, is still such a solid watch to this day. But weirdly, I can't remember a lot of the show's episodes. Like, I remember liking it. I remember liking Max and Goofy. I remember loving PJ and Max's friendship. I thought Pete was really a fun character in it, and I loved his wife and daughter. But I barely can remember any individual episodes, whereas I can remember this sparse episode of, like, Rescue Rangers growing up, or DuckTales, or Darkwing Duck especially. I think the show I paid attention to the most out of all of those, though, was Gargoyles. So a few moments ago, I actively used the hook shot for its other major use. You can use it to stand on top of a hook and fire at a nearby hook to make a rope bridge. With that said, when you do that, you do actively lose the hook shot you used to make the bridge. So what they'll do in a lot of cases is make a puzzle out of finding the hook shots you need to make the bridges moving forward. And usually when you use one, there's going to be another one right next door in some cases. I want to say I found out about Goof Troop as a game pretty late, though. I want to say I first saw it on YouTube in, like, 2009 or 10. I mean, I was like, ooh, I liked that show growing up, and found a ROM online and played it and liked it, and, well, here we are, 13-ish years later. It's weird, growing up, like, my brother would talk about a lot of games from when he rented a lot back when the SNES and Genesis were, like, major consoles, same with the NES. And he would very frequently, like, praise basically any Disney game, but I don't think he ever really talked about this one from memory. When I think about him talking about games like that, he would talk about, like, Castle of Illusion. He would talk about both versions of Aladdin. He would talk about Lion King. I don't think he ever brought up Goof Troop. And to an extent, there's probably a thing of, like, maybe he thought the game looked like it just wasn't his style of thing, or he realized it's probably meant for younger audiences compared to the other ones, so it just wasn't probably, like, he wasn't the intended target audience kind of deal. I'll have to ask him about that at some point. Also, be careful of that last screen I was just on. That screen introduced bomb blocks, where when you kick them, or when they first get kicked, rather, a timer starts. It starts at green, then goes yellow, then goes red, and explodes. And the timer depends on the individual block, rather than them all having the same timer. And if you're next to them when they explode, you're losing a life. Also, these purple pirates are annoying in that they can actively kick blocks as well. This is annoying for two reasons. One, if a block is kicked at you, it can kill you as well. But also, they can potentially make it so that a puzzle room you're in like this is unsolvable and you'll have to leave the room and re-enter it and try again and hope they don't kick it that way again. There's only a couple rooms they're in that are puzzle rooms in the game, but they're in enough that it actively does get really annoying in the few they're in. And now we got cannons. You might not think you can, but you can actively catch the bombs they throw immediately and then just throw it back into them. And they're not really worth going after, but I figure I might as well just to make things a little bit safer for me. Before we head up that door, come over here, make sure you grab this other hook shot because you're going to want it coming up. Also, a very important thing to note about throwing items in the game. While you do have an arc when you throw them, as long as the barrel or whatever you're throwing actively does make contact, it's going to hit no matter what. But also, you can throw over, by and large, anything in level design. So like a little hedge, a fence, anything that is there you can throw over and hit enemies through. And a lot of times, they can do the same to you, particularly these green pirates can still throw their swords over things. But most enemies in the game rely on contact damage, so you can just completely bypass any threat they could have by just being behind something. And this is why you wanted to get that particular hook shot. Make sure you hit that switch up there, because otherwise you're not going to be able to. Well, actually, no, you can throw the barrel at the bottom left over at that switch, I think. It's just that you're probably not going to want to do that by the end of it. And now we're going to come back over here and grab ourselves that master key that probably feels like they wanted you to dig it up, but it's just out in the open. So maybe even internally they were like, yeah, the digging doesn't feel good, so let's just put it right there. And once we do that, we're going to be just about at the boss fight. By and large, the boss fights in the game aren't hard. It's just that sometimes they throw a lot at you, can be a bit of a problem. Yeah, there's the boss right up there. They even give you 2 lives before this one. The green and blue larger pirates roll at you whenever you get basically perpendicular with them, which can be annoying because they are completely invincible during that. So if you're trying to, say, use the hook shot to stun them, you're more or less just going to be hoping they hit something before they hit you, which can be annoying. Boss 2 is Firebug.
Avast, it gets hot in the tropics. Think fast.
Firebug throws fire torches at you. If you get too comfortable up at the top, he does a little bit of a wave attack with his torch and tries to run into you, and he'll occasionally just breathe a gigantic fire thing that tries to track onto you. When you run out of barrels to throw, 2 other pirates will spawn on the left and right sides of the screen to throw more barrels to try to hit you. But as long as you got your arms up in the air, you'll be able to catch whatever they throw at you without a care. And thus, you can just continuously throw more into Firebug. The attack when you're on the top of the screen can be hard to dodge depending on how you're trying to dodge other attacks before that. But ultimately, if only because there's a single target you have to throw at, this is a much easier boss than Jester Hole, on top of the fact that he's always vulnerable. And that's that. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to head, I think, through both stages 3 and 4 and see what those hold for us. See you guys then.